Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the United Nations Population Fund, commonly called UNFPA? What is the Population Fund doing to help to reduce unintended pregnancies, as well as combat problems such as child marriages and also female genital mutilation? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at a very unique United Nations agency, and that is the United Nations Population Fund, and what it's doing to try to help families and people all around the world with a variety of issues pertaining to family planning and that type of thing. My guest today is an expert on these topics and on this agency. My guest today is Mr. Arthur Erken. Mr. Arthur Erken, a Dutch national, is the director of the Division of Communications and Strategic Partnerships with the United Nations Population Fund. Mr. Erken, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's get right into we'll try to use the acronym as much as possible, UNFPA, but the UN Population Fund. What is the mission of the Population Fund? When was it started and why was it started?
Well, the UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, was established in 1969 to specifically help countries with their population issues. Now, over time, that mission has basically boiled down to three things, which is one, to ensure that every pregnancy is wanted. That means people need to have the means to plan their families, that every pregnancy is safe, that women can go through the pregnancy in a safe manner, that the baby and the mother are safe, and that every young person's potential is fulfilled. And that's our main mission as we go forward. It started from a very small trust fund to now a fund that is close to $1 billion a year.
That's very, very, very good. That's a large fund.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. You said to make sure that all pregnancies are intended, that people want. That we'll start off with goal number one. What are some of the programs or projects you have underway to help achieve that particular objective?
In almost all countries we work in, Bill, is that we support the national family planning programs, which means that we help ensure and to a large extent also fund programs to make sure that contraceptive means are available at any time for a woman and a man, that they have the right quality and the right quantity, but also that they have the information to make that choice. Because for us, the choice, the free choice to choose to decide the number and the spacing of the children is a basic human right that was enshrined in human rights instruments of the United Nations. And we try to fulfill that right of every couple and every individual to decide freely and responsibly the number and spacing of the children. So our programs are really geared towards that in practically all countries in the world that ask for our assistance. And we've been working on family planning programs since '69, basically up until now.
And approximately how many countries where you're operating? How
More than 150 countries.
More than 150 countries,
yes.
right? Now, the United Nations is not a one-world government. It's not a supranational organization. You just don't go into a country and say, well, I'm here, I'm in Bangladesh or wherever it might be, saying we're here to do what we do best. How do you do that? Do you work with the governments? Do you work with non-governmental organizations? Who are your partners in setting up these types of programs?
We work, of course, principally first and foremost with governments, because we are working, of course, at the request of governments to help them in their population issues. But in the actual implementation of these programs that we support, of course, civil society is a very important partner. Parliamentarians are a very important partner. So it's a conglomeration, if you will, of government, public health services, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and of course, as I said, we look for the political support, of course, from parliaments and parliamentarians, the media, to reach out to make people aware of the activities that we are funding. But obviously, it's at the request of governments. And so we have these 5-year country programs that we agree upon beforehand, these programs are approved by the UNFPA Executive Board before they're starting to be implemented. And they basically, work on three areas. It's family planning, maternal health, and a lot of it has to do with gender equality and empowerment of women, which are of course vital elements in promotion of family planning and ensuring that pregnancies are wanted and safe.
Exactly. And you mentioned maternal health. Of course, that ties right into your objective number 2, I think, to make sure that they're safe, that pregnancies are safe. How do you work in that particular area?
Well, let me first say, I think it's important for the viewers to know that every day 800 women die of entirely preventable causes during their pregnancy or the delivery of their babies. That's more than 300,000 a year. And our main mission, of course, is to make sure that that becomes zero. One of the things we do is to ensure that every pregnant woman over time has a skilled attendant at birth. That could be, of course, a nurse or a midwife, but ensuring that every woman has that, which is very important. In Bangladesh, where I live, there were 7,000 women who died every year, and most of that because they didn't have the skilled attendant with them. That's one. So we help with the training of these midwives, setting up these training curricula and the training programs for them. That's the software. The hardware is, of course, making sure that there's equipment, there are facilities that are equipped to deal with safe deliveries. And the third element would be the information, making people aware that you can deliver at a facility. That is very important because many women still in the world deliver at home in their in-laws' house, with of course all the consequences of a potential unsafe delivery, and of course that is what leads to a high maternal mortality. It's also interesting to note that of all the MDGs, the 8 MDGs we are now being substituted by the SDGs, but of the Millennium Development Goals, the one on maternal health was the one that really had most difficulties, because women's health is still an issue that is less in the news, that has less political commitment, less resources. And I think one of the missions of UNFPA is to make governments aware that this is such a vital program, and it's of course a human right that women have access to quality services, including for their pregnancy and their safe delivery of their babies.
Exactly. That was one of the maternal development or Millennium Development Goals that was lagging, as I recall, as we reached the end of the 15-year period. And it appears the key to that, I guess, is to make sure there's a financial and political will to help carry it out, but also to involve the women, the mothers who are involved in this, to make sure they have the correct information. Is that right?
No, that's absolutely right. And of course, one of the missions of United Nations Population Fund was one to make governments aware of what was happening. As I told you, 300,000 women every year. That's unacceptable. That's a moral outrage that we try to create among the governments to say we can do much better, because 95% of those deaths are entirely preventable. We know what we need to do, making sure that women have access to a skilled attendant. Family planning is very important to ensure that the pregnancies are planned, not too early, not too late, not too many, and not too close to each other. And of course that there is emergency obstetric care, so that if it goes wrong, there are facilities available for the women to survive a pregnancy.
And of course you have a lot of information on your website, www.unfpa.org. You also, your most recent report is State of the World Population Report 2015. What is that about, and what were some of the major recommendations or findings that came out of that report?
Well, the State of World Population Report is a flagship publication of the United Nations Population Fund. We recently launched the 2015 version. It's called Shelter from the Storm, and it's really about a forgotten a forgotten field in the humanitarian assistance programs, which is the specific needs of women and girls, and particularly their sexual and reproductive health needs. If you're pregnant before a disaster, you're still pregnant during a disaster, and you're also still pregnant after the disaster. But the facilities that help you through the pregnancy might have been gone. So one of the major lessons learned and major messages of this report is, one, we should never forget this. What happens is we think about shelter, we think about water and sanitation and food, all very important. But the specific needs of women in those circumstances are very important. Secondly, what we see is that gender-based violence increases during an emergency. Again, we need to provide specific services, counseling, post-rape kits, facilities for women to deal with the consequences of that. And I think that's the main message. The third message, sorry, is actually we would like to see a continuity of care, because what happens is that before a crisis you provide these services, then a crisis happens, and then all of a sudden it's completely disrupted. We give food, shelter, sanitation, but not these specific services, and slowly the crisis is over, and then we restart again. What we are saying is no matter what the situation is, there should be a continuity of care, because these women are still there. As I said, they still can get babies and get pregnant, or they still are pregnant. And so it is important that we work with the humanitarian aid agencies, that these services continue. The modus operandi might be different. We might now do it from a tent rather than a hospital, because the hospital was destroyed. But nevertheless, these services need to be available. And it is something that is forgotten. It's a no-brainer probably for us, but if you tell people and saying, women still get their periods. Oh yes, you're right. Well, who takes care of it? Where do they get the facility, the services for that, the means to deal with that? I lived for 6 years in Bangladesh, and every year Bangladesh is being has floods that are covering the land, and people live on embankments. Women also deliver their babies on embankments. And of course our mission is really to ensure that with the government of Bangladesh in this case, but of course there are many other examples, to ensure that over time will no longer happen. And I think that's important. Also what you see in many humanitarian situations, that women are being they are discriminated already in their societies. When an emergency happens or a conflict happens, they are even more discriminated against. Have to be in the back of the line for the toilets. There are no specific facilities. That is where what our mission is, to ensure that that's is being taken care of also.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, excuse me, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would encourage our viewers to go to www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs, and also to make suggestions for future topics and future guests. Today we're looking at a very unique United Nations agency, and that's the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. And to see what UNFPA is doing to provide assistance to women who are dealing with unintended pregnancies, with maternal problems, and just a wide range of challenges. My guest today is an expert in this area and on this agency. My guest today is Mr. Arthur Erken. Mr. Erken, a Dutch national, is the Director of the Division of Communication and Strategic Partnerships for the United Nations Population Fund. We're talking about the Population Fund. I may have to get some assistance from you, some medical assistance here. I'm starting a cold and it's all settling in my throat, it seems like. But let's talk a little bit about, you were laying out a scenario a minute ago that we often overlook, and you're right. We overlook if a typhoon hits the Philippines and levels an area, just destroys everything in its wake, or if you have a Syrian civil war and people are on the move, they still have needs. They have issues that will not change. It makes not a bit of difference. The problem is they don't have the services available.
Correct.
That is an extremely tricky proposition, is it not? Do you work with other UN agencies and other non-governmental organizations to help provide services to these people?
Absolutely. Of course, we cannot do it alone. One is for financial reasons, but also because, of course, other UN agencies and other humanitarian aid agencies provide vital services. UNICEF, the World Health Organization, of course, when it comes to health, are very important, as is the World Food Programme to deliver food, and UNHCR, of course, for the protection of refugees. So we work, of course, within the UN family on these issues. But we see it as our mission also within the UN families to raise this issue of reproductive health, sexual health in emergencies. Also the provision of family planning. As you rightly said, there is an increase often in unintended pregnancies during a crisis. And UNFPA is uniquely, of course, placed to ensure that we provide those specific services in the aid relief programs. Not just with the UN, also, of course, with civil society and humanitarian aid agencies. Again, to make them aware about this, and where they can, of course, provide these services, that they also should provide those vital services, which really saves lives. This is not just a luxury. Out of these 800 women that die every day, 800 women every day die of pregnancy-related complications. 500 of those we see in emergencies or in fragile states. So it's not just an issue of it is a good thing to do, it is actually a life-saving issue of providing reproductive health information and services in crisis situations.
And of course, as I understand it, the services you provide are totally voluntary.
Correct.
They come in and if people want them, fine.
Correct.
Now, there are a lot of myths out there about the United Nations agencies. We all hear them every day. But tell me, what is UNFPA, the UN Populations Fund, stance on abortion? Now, you hear that they do promote abortion, you hear they don't promote abortion. What exactly is the status?
United Nations Population Fund does not promote abortion in any way. We are bound, of course, by the boundaries and the parameters given by the international community, in this case during the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, which was held in Cairo. And paragraph 7.25 of the program of action clearly gives those parameters. One is that, of course, abortion is not a method of family planning, and we're not allowed to promote the use of abortion. But secondly, where abortion is not against the law, those abortions should be safe. And where it is against the law, where it is illegal, the United Nations is mandated to work to deal with the consequences of unsafe abortions to save women's lives. Exactly. And those are the parameters that were given by the international community to UNFPA.
So you abide by the laws, mores, and folkways of the countries
Absolutely.
where you operate. Sure.
As we discussed previously, we work only at the invitation of
exactly,
government. So
right.
we cannot go beyond the legal framework that are in those countries.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned the International Conference on Population and Development back in 94.
94 in
94.
Cairo.
And that seems like almost ancient history now, but it's still, that was a very substantive United Nations conference, and it laid the groundwork, the foundation for many activities today and perhaps directions or policies.
Correct.
What came out of that conference that is helping you today to meet your mission?
It's a completely landmark United Nations conference in '94. I think a couple of things came out of that which are still relevant today. One is the direct link between population and development. You cannot discuss these two without each other. But secondly, it laid the groundwork for the goal to have universal access to sexual and reproductive health information and services by 2014, so a 20-year program that has been reaffirmed by the international community last year to continue until we have universal access to sexual and reproductive health information and services. And this is really a landmark. So it was a program that did away with, let's say, top-down targets and put the individual man and woman at the center of development, and saying it is the individual needs and their rights that we need to fulfill. And that was, of course, important coming out of an era which was much more top-down, fertility driving, environment in which we were at that time. It was important to drill down the fertility rates, for instance. Cairo did away with that and saying, no, it is the individual that, of course, should decide freely and responsibly the number and space of children. And we should provide the means in terms of information and services for individuals and couples to be able to fulfill that right. And that was landmark.
Exactly. And as I read articles, the fertility rate is coming down in many areas, most areas, I guess, of the world is coming down. And of course, we hear a lot about climate change, and we're leaving a carbon footprint, and everybody on the planet, every person leaves a carbon footprint. Obviously, someone who's living in very poor or destitute conditions is leaving a very small footprint. Somebody in an industrialized country, such as Canada, the United States, or Germany, or wherever, is leaving a larger footprint. Right. The population projection, right now we're at about 7.3 billion, I believe, and by 2050 it's supposed to be like 9.3 billion, roughly. That's going to add a tremendous number of people to pull down on the resources, the Earth, the natural resources, which we see are diminishing, and also it's going to leave more of a carbon footprint, promoting climate change and problems to be dealt with at that point. Is it feasible? I just ask you a theoretical question. Some people have said maybe we should try to have an international campaign, all voluntary, not coercive, but to promote zero population growth. 2.1 children per family, and see if, or 2.1 children per person, per female, and see if we could hold the population stable. Is that being discussed, or is it even feasible? Maybe it's not even feasible. Does that come up in your discussions?
Well, let's first look at the facts. I mean, as you said, the fertility rate has gone down dramatically. Right now, globally, the fertility rate is 2.5 children per woman, which is a remarkable decline, of course, from the 70s where it was like 6. So it has come down dramatically and continues to go down. So while fertility is, of course, declining, population is still growing. There's not much we can do to alter that, because the population that will give birth to the next generation has already been born. So we will get to 9 billion, no matter what. Even if we stop, it will still be 9 billion. So when it comes to climate change and to our global footprint, our environmental footprint, we have to look at other ways of reducing that through technology and other ways, because that population, that world's population, will become 9 billion. So there's not much we can do.
The idea is to move to clean energy, to move off fossil fuels, get to
it's
wind,
our behavior
solar.
that is more important than the fertility. Yeah,
Exactly.
That's been done. I mean, in that sense, you know, the population programs and family planning programs have been enormously successful in providing women and men with the choices. Globally, whenever you do these studies, and we do a lot of these studies per country, you will see that on average men and women want to have 2 children. So it's a lot of it providing these information and those services which will reduce fertility already dramatically, and has reduced the fertility already dramatically in most countries. So really we need to look at solutions that are out there, while we still provide voluntary family planning services, of course, of the highest qualities. Because what is important, and we can do still something, 225 million women, married women today, do not have access to family planning. And that, of course, is one of the missions we would like to fulfill, is to ensure that that demand that is already there is also being fulfilled. And that's married women. So if we look at the unmarried but sexually active population, then we talk probably about 500 million. So there's still a large group we need to address, and we need to give the choice to start, you know, using family planning of their choice. But the real solutions will come from, you know, technology and the things that you said, the green growth and so on, because that world population will be 9 billion.
Exactly right. That's a very good point. You deal with a lot of sensitive issues, a lot of sensitive areas. One is with child brides, or young people getting married, perhaps a daughter being sold or something like that. How do you deal with that? That's part of a culture at times. It's a part of a financial, economic system. How do you work on that?
That is a very good question, and a very, very difficult topic to deal with. Partly it's economic, and partly it's culture. Economic in the sense that, you know, for poor families there's almost an incentive to sell your daughter off at an early age. And the culture part is that people are afraid that girls will run off with another partner, or will have an illegitimate child, or so on. So it is a difficult program. What we do together with UNICEF, we have a global program dealing with child marriage. One is, of course, to ensure first the awareness around this problem, that it is really about violating fundamental human rights of children. That's one. So make populations aware that we need to have protection in place for the children. Keep them in school, and schools is probably the most important part, to make sure that girls at least stay in school till they are 18, and therefore have a better chance to have a career and to have a partner that they like. Second, probably is equally important, is legislation, ensuring that, you know, there are laws in place that girls cannot marry before the age of 18. But the most important part, as I said, is working with communities, is really making them aware that this is, and I truly believe that no father or no parent really would like to sell their daughters off at that age. I'm a father of 2 daughters, and I think I speak for all fathers, that it really is not something you want to do, but probably feel obliged to do because of culture or because of pressure. When I was in Bangladesh, even college professors told me that they felt pressure from their families to, when their daughters were a little bit older, that already then the family would say, well, it's about time to marry your daughter. Like that's even in those, let's say, higher class, it comes up. So it's ingrained in the culture that girls are there to marry someone and not to have a career, and that takes time.
Exactly. And of course, the United Nations Population Fund is dealing with some very important and very sensitive issues, but they do resonate not with only within the countries, but outside of the countries. And our viewers can go to unfpa.org and get more information if they'd like. But Mr. Arthur Erken, I want to thank you so very much
My
for
pleasure.
a very interesting and
My
a very
pleasure.
informative program.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.